There you go. Is that deck?
We do these as a testament to the brave souls that served on these ships and that, fought for their countries.
42 seconds. That is all it took for an entire warship to vanish. When researchers sent a robot down to the bottom of the Solomon Sea, they were looking for a ship, but they found a time capsule. The blast shields are still bent from the explosion. The anti-aircraft guns are still pointing at the sky. It looks like the crew just left 5 minutes ago. But what most people don't realize is that the sinking was the easy part. The drone footage is just the opening act for a survival story so dark, the Navy tried to bury it. What the sonar saw. The ocean is a master at keeping secrets. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor. So when the crew of the research vessel Petrel set out to find the USS Juneau, they knew the odds were stacked against them. This wasn't just a treasure hunt. It was a mission to close a wound that had been open for 76 years. The area they were searching is known as the Solomon Islands. During World War II, this place was hell on earth. Today, the surface is beautiful, calm, and turquoise, but below it is a jagged, chaotic nightmare of underwater mountains and deep trenches. The Petrel is owned by the estate of Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. He poured millions into building a ship that could go where no one else could. The star of the show is the Autonomous Underwater Vehicle, or AUV. This isn't a guy in a suit. It is a yellow robot packed with sonar and 4K cameras capable of diving to depths that would crush a nuclear submarine.
They search many miles of seabed using an autonomous underwater vehicle, or AUV, a robot submarine worth $5 million.
On March 17, 2018, the team lowered the AUV into the water. The target depth was staggering, 13,800 feet. That is nearly 3 miles of water pressing down. As the robot descended, it traveled through the midnight zone. The sunlight fades away completely after a few thousand feet. After that, it is total, eternal darkness. The temperature drops to just above freezing. It is an alien world. The team in the control room watched the sonar feed for hours. They saw nothing but mud and rock. It is a boring, tense game of waiting. You are staring at a screen hoping for a straight line. Nature doesn't make straight lines, only humans do. Then, it happened. A sharp artificial shape appeared on the sonar. The room went quiet. They maneuvered the AUV closer and turned on the high-intensity floodlights. The darkness was pushed back, and suddenly, a wall of steel appeared. It wasn't a rock, it was the stern of a warship. And there, incredibly, the letters were still visible. Juneau. The experts were silent. Usually ships that have been down this long are covered in thick layers of marine growth. They look like fuzzy reefs, but at this depth, the chemistry of the ocean is different. There is very little oxygen. There is almost no food for marine life. So, the ship wasn't covered in life. It was naked. It looked like it had been placed there yesterday. But here is the catch. As the drone moved along the side of the ship, the awe turned into horror.
See, that looks like a fracture in the ship.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's broken badly.
The ship wasn't whole. The metal was twisted and shredded in a way that looked unnatural. Giant steel plates, inches thick, were ripped apart like wet cardboard. The drone piloted over the deck. The experts saw the anti-aircraft guns. They were rusted, sure, but they were still pointing up. They were locked in the position they were in on the morning of November 13th, 1942. The crew was fighting until the very last second. The camera peered into the dark openings of the hull. This is where the silence in the control room got heavy. They weren't just looking at a machine, they were looking at a tomb. Inside the wreckage, they could see cables, walkways, and equipment. The preservation was so good that it felt intrusive. It felt like they were spying on a moment that was supposed to be private. The crazy part is the debris field. The bow and the stern were found about half a mile apart. This confirmed the reports from the war. The ship didn't sink. It snapped. The force required to throw half a cruiser that far away is mind-boggling. The submersible found the propellers. They were bent, but not from hitting the bottom. They were bent from the torque of the engines running at full speed when the ship was lost. The Juneau was running for its life when it was caught. This visual confirmation settled a decades-old debate. Some people thought the ship had capsized. Others thought it broke slowly. The wreckage proves it was instant. The experts stared at the screens, realizing that 687 men never stood a chance. But to understand why the ship is in pieces, we have to look at the chaotic battle that sealed its fate. The first torpedo strike. To understand the tragedy, you have to understand the ship. The USS Juneau was an Atlanta-class light cruiser. She was beautiful. She was fast, capable of hitting 32 knots. She was designed to be an anti-aircraft platform, bristling with guns to protect aircraft carriers. But speed comes at a price. To make her fast, the designers stripped away the armor. Her skin was thin. Basically, she was a glass cannon. She could dish out damage, but she couldn't take it. In November 1942, the battle for Guadalcanal was reaching its peak. The Japanese were trying to reinforce their troops on the island. The US Navy had to stop them. On the night of Friday the 13th, yes, really, the two fleets collided in the dark. It wasn't a strategic naval battle. It was a knife fight in a phone booth. The ships were so close that they couldn't depress their guns low enough to hit the enemy hulls. They were firing into each other's bridges. The Juneau was in the thick of it. Early in the fight, a Japanese torpedo slammed into her forward fire room. The explosion buckled the deck and broke her keel. She lost steering. She was crippled, but she didn't sink. Not yet. The crew managed to limp away. The next morning, the Juneau was retreating with a small group of battered American ships. The sun was up. The crew probably thought they had survived the worst of it. They were exhausted, drinking coffee, and tending to the wounded. Then, the ocean betrayed them. Lurking beneath the waves was the Japanese submarine I-26. The captain, Minoru Yokota, saw the American ships moving slowly. He lined up his shot. He fired a spread of torpedoes. Most of them missed, but one didn't. This torpedo was a Type 93, nicknamed the Long Lance. It was the most advanced torpedo of the war. It was oxygen-fueled, which meant it left no bubble trail. You couldn't see it coming. And it carried a massive warhead, nearly 1,100 pounds of high explosive. The torpedo was meant for another ship, the USS San Francisco, but it passed her and struck the Juneau. And here is the horrifying part. It hit the Juneau in the exact same spot where the first torpedo had hit the night before. But this time, it punched through to the magazine. The magazine is where the ship stores tons of gunpowder and shells. The result was an earth-shattering detonation. The Juneau didn't just break, she vaporized. A massive pillar of yellow and purple smoke shot 3,000 feet into the air. The captain of the USS Helena, who was watching from nearby, wrote in his log, "It was then that the Juneau was blown up with all hands. The explosion was the most horrific I have ever seen. The ship completely disappeared in 42 seconds. Think about that number, 42 seconds. That is not enough time to launch a boat. It is not enough time to put on a life vest. It is barely enough time to realize the end is near." The submersible footage confirms this violence. The blast pressure was so intense it blew the metal outward. The ship was gutted from the inside. The bow and stern were severed, instantly sinking like stones. The explosion would have been instantaneous. They wouldn't have felt a thing. But for the men on the upper decks, the nightmare was just starting. About 100 men were blown into the water. They were alive, but they were swimming in a thick layer of fuel oil. The other American ships saw the explosion. They saw the smoke, and they made a cold, calculated decision. They assumed no one could survive a blast like that. They also knew a submarine was still hunting them. So, the order was given, do not stop. The fleet sailed away. The survivors in the water watched the masts of their friends disappear over the horizon. They were alone in the middle of the Pacific, and they were floating in a place known for its sharks. While the ship was gone, the horror for the men in the water was just beginning. No rescue coming. This is the part of the story that makes you angry. It is the part that haunts the families to this day. When the Juneau exploded, roughly 100 men survived the initial blast. They were dazed, burned, and covered in black oil. They clung to cargo nets, pieces of wood, and life rafts that had popped loose. They expected rescue to come within hours. They were wrong. Because of the threat of the submarine and a breakdown in communication, the Navy command didn't know there were survivors. A B-17 bomber flew over them and signaled the location, but the report got lost in a pile of paperwork at the headquarters. So, the men waited. The sun in the South Pacific is brutal. It blistered their skin. The oil got into their eyes and their lungs. Thirst set in immediately. But the biggest threat wasn't the sun. It was the wildlife. Iron Bottom Sound is notorious for its shark populations. The vibrations of the explosion and the smell of blood in the water acted like a dinner bell. Hundreds of sharks swarmed the area. Survivors later reported that every night the screams would start. Men would be pulled under, one by one. It was a grim lottery. You could be talking to a buddy, and a second later, he would be gone in a splash of red foam. But the psychological toll was worse. After a few days without water, the men started to see things. They suffered from extreme delirium. Some men imagined that they saw land. They would swim away from the rafts, never to be seen again. Others imagined the ship was still there, just below the surface. They would dive down to get a cool drink of water from the mess hall and never come back up. One survivor remembered a sailor claiming he had a car parked nearby and was going to drive to get help. He swam off into the open ocean. It was total chaos. Among the group was the youngest Sullivan brother, Albert. Survivors say he was alive for the first few days, but he was frantic with grief. He kept calling out for his brothers, George, Frank, but the ocean only answered with the slap of waves. Eventually, Albert was lost to the sea. By the time a PBY Catalina flying boat finally spotted them 8 days later, only 10 men were left alive. 10 out of the original 100 survivors, and out of the nearly 700 crew members. When the rescuers pulled them out of the water, they were severely emaciated. They were covered in ulcers from the salt and oil. They were traumatized beyond words. The experts analyzing the wreck site know this context. When they look at the twisted metal on the ocean floor, they aren't just seeing steel. They are seeing the starting point of an 8-day ordeal. The delayed rescue was a scandal. The captain of the cruiser USS Helena, Captain Hoover, was relieved of command for leaving the scene, though many argued he was just following standard procedure to protect his ship from submarines. It remains a controversial topic in naval history. The tragedy of the delayed rescue rippled all the way back to a small town in Iowa, entombed in steel. The loss of the USS Juneau is unique because of the Sullivans. George, Francis, Joseph, Madison, and Albert. They were a tight-knit Irish Catholic clan. They did everything together. When Pearl Harbor happened, they marched down to the recruiting office. They had a letter from the Navy saying they should be separated. The brothers refused. They said, "We stick together." The Navy, desperate for positive publicity and men, agreed. It was a decision that would haunt the military. When the Juneau went down, the Navy didn't tell the family immediately. In fact, the Sullivans kept writing letters to their boys for weeks. The letters were returned unopened. Rumors started swirling in their hometown. Finally, in January 1943, 3 officers knocked on the door of the Sullivan home. The father, Thomas, answered. He looked at the uniforms and asked, "Which one?" The officer replied, "I am sorry, all 5. The mother, Aletta, collapsed. The news sent shockwaves through America. It was the biggest single-family loss in U.S. military history. It was a PR nightmare and a national tragedy. Because of this, the U.S. War Department adopted the sole survivor policy. This set of regulations was designed to protect members of a family from the draft or combat duty if they had already lost siblings in service. It is the rule that the movie Saving Private Ryan is based on. So when the submersible reached the Juneau, it was visiting a site that is sacred to American history. The footage showed the area where the brothers likely slept. It showed the mess deck where they ate. It brings a human scale to the massive industrial destruction. The experts treated the site with extreme caution. They didn't touch anything. They didn't take souvenirs. This is a war grave. The Sullivans are still there, entombed in the steel that they swore to defend. But there is a strange comfort in the discovery. For decades, the family had no grave to visit. Now, they have coordinates. They have images. They know where the boys are. The USS Juneau isn't just a shipwreck. It's a warning about the cost of war and the secrets the ocean keeps. Do you think the Navy made the right call leaving the scene? Or was it an unforgivable mistake? Let me know in the comments. If you want more deep-sea mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe.